The bell struck 3 times while Elias Moros' skiff scraped the quay. Suspicion tightened Elias's jaw the instant he stepped onto the slick stones. He smelled salt and hay and something sharper beneath it, a metallic trace that set his fingers to flexing around the brass chain of his pocket watch. Villagers were already gathered, scraping boots, shoving lanterns toward one another, voices rising and breaking on the wind. The bell rang. Mayor Thomas shouted before Elias could ask a question, and his voice carried the demand of a town that wanted blame as quickly as it wanted answers. Elias moved through their press without answering. He kept his hands visible, palms rested against his satchel, and let his eyes take in simple facts. Footprints in the sheen of rain on the quay, damp rope fibers clinging to the mortar beneath the tower, a clerk's ledger carried open by a shaking hand. He introduced himself with a tilt of his chin and a steadying line. "I am Elias Moro." "Tell me exactly what happened here." The line of his speech was short, and his voice did not ask for permission to be believed. It asked for facts. Mayor Thomas shoved a wet sleeve toward Elias. It rang at midnight. The rope was cut years ago. Abbot Ansel swore it himself. The mayor's fingers trembled when he pointed to the ragged stump of rope that hung useless from the bell's mouth. The crowd shifted, murmurs rose. Why now? Who would want the bell to sound again? Suspicion moved through the villagers with a physical life. A hardening of faces, hands finding one another for support, whispers that became accusations. Abbot Ansel stepped forward then, armor of calm against the town's agitation. He wore the monastery's dark habit, its wool dark with damp, and his eyes were small and practiced at concealment. "Elias," he said, naming him, which in that hour felt like a referral and a plea at once. "We cut the rope after Brother Julian's disappearance. We buried the cord and we sealed the mechanism. Whoever made the bell sound has breached our walls." Elias saw the way Ansel's fingers curled around the hem of his sleeve. The abbot's knuckles were white and quick with a man's habit of concealment. Sister Miriam arrived close behind the abbot, carrying a folded scrap of cloth in a careful palm. She kept her head low but her voice carried. "I found this in the East Gallery 3 hours ago," she said. "It is part of a novice habit. Brother Julian should have been buried with such things." Her hand shook when she offered the cloth. Elias took it and smelled cloth and starch and a faint iron tang. The scrap had been hidden in a crack in a cloister pillar, its edges frayed with sea wind. Elias' first decision was practical. He moved toward the monastery doors with Abbot Ansel and Sister Miriam beside him. As he crossed the threshold, he set the emotion he felt, suspicion, tight against his method. He would not let it cast him to hastily accuse. He would gather facts. His fingers skimmed the worn stone of the cloister. Dampness left small, dark fingerprints he noted and did not speak of. A short man in a wool cap, Brother Felon, joined them on the stair, lantern held low. They climbed the spiral stair in careful, spaced steps. The stair stone smelled of salt and old wax. Elias ran his palm along the rail and felt the shallow notches of many hands. Brother Felon kept his lantern steady though the stair sloped and sighed under each footfall. Inside the belfry, Elias found fresh prints in dust that should have been ground into old, unmoving grime. The prints were small, as if made by a barefoot, and they led away from the bell's rim toward a narrow hatch. Elias crouched beside them and traced a print with his gloved finger. He spoke low. "These are recent." Brother Felon answered in a raspy voice. "We thought no one came up since the rope was cut." We sealed that hatch. Elias stood and found a wedge of iron lodged in softer mortar, its head smudged with fresh rust. He lifted the iron striker with a careful hand. The tool had been pried inside the tower and hidden in place. Someone had used it to strike the bell from within, not from the rope that would have hung. That discovery shifted Elias's feeling from suspicion toward a wary doubt. If the bell had been struck from inside, the saboteur had access to the tower and knowledge of its hidden mechanisms. He looked at Abbot Ansel and Sister Miriam, "Who knows the tower's interior?" he asked. Abbot Ansel named 3 novices and 2 older brothers. Sister Miriam added quietly, "A Brother Julian left bitter words. He argued with Ansel about the ledger and about favors he said he'd seen. I thought he left for the coast." Her voice pinched. She blinked and swallowed. Her admission began a second shift in Elias' emotions. Doubt folded into concern. Concern softened his suspicion to a practical urgency. They descended into the monastery yard where villagers pressed again with questions sharpened like knives. Mayor Thomas forced Elias into a ring of expectant faces. If you do not find answers. Moro, the mayor said, staring at Elias as if trust and threat were the same coin. People will look elsewhere. They will decide for themselves. That sentence landed as a direct demand. Elias heard the hidden warning. He looked toward the sea and saw the backs of men poised, angry and ready to move. Elias found Brother Felon waiting at the quay when he returned with Abbot Ansel to show the cut rope and the iron striker. The tide had retreated and left lanes of wet rock that reflected lantern light in fine, broken ribbons. Footprints led from the monastery gates down to the tidal steps, where the stones were slick with algae and sea spray. Elias followed the prints, Brother Felon at his shoulder, lanterns swinging in dull arcs. At the tidal steps they found a halting of the prints, as if someone had paused to look for something. Elias clapped a glove over a disturbed patch of sand and found an impression shaped to hold a hand. He lifted a small carved chain shaped with the monastery's seal from a pile of pebbles. This belongs to the monastery's keys, Brother Felon. No layman wears such a thing. The thrift of his sentence carried weight. Elias turned the chain in his fingers and felt the detail of the seal pressed in brass. The edges still held beech grit. From that moment Elias' uncertainty tightened into a sharper instrument. Here the rope stump, the secret tool, prints leading to the tide, and now the monastery seal that had been dropped in flight. He nodded to Brother Felon. Someone left in a hurry, he said, and then he let his voice harden with an ordered plan. We search the East Gallery and the cells. We ask questions about Brother Julian and the ledger. Ansel and Sister Miriam separated, each heading for a different wing. Sister Miriam pulled Elias aside in the infirmary corridor, where tapestries hung damp at the windows. Her voice came low and breathless. I saw a shadow in the East Gallery, Elias, she said, 2 nights before the bell. I thought I saw Brother Julian passing beneath the arch. He had a package under his habit. He was not himself. Elias kept his face a mask as he listened, but his hands betrayed him with a small, quick rub of his fingertips. Her story bent suspicion inward again. That was an emotion shift from pragmatic doubt to a focused suspicion toward those who had access. Elias Miriam for specifics. When did you see him? He asked. She answered in short phrases, and Elias let her words be the proof. 2 nights ago, near 10. He moved as if he were afraid a shadow followed him. Elias's reply was immediate. Who saw him then? Who can verify? Miriam named a novice who had been assigned to the refectory, but who refused to speak openly that morning. He is frightened, Miriam. And the word carried a physical quality. Her hands clenched in the folds of her apron. At dawn a wet wind pushed through the monastery gates, and Elias had the town's faces again as people clustered unwillingly to wait for judgment. He spoke with the mayor in tight sentences. We found the seal. We found recent footprints. Someone within the monastery used a tool to strike the bell. You will not do the town any favors by lynching suspects. You will let me do my work. Mayor Thomas' jaw ground. If you find nothing, Mitter. Moreau, he said, we will act. Their exchange became an argument in 5 quick lines. Elias warning restraint, the mayor demanding decisive punishment, villagers echoing both. Elias left them to the quay and returned to search the East Gallery with Brother Felon. The gallery smelled of old oil and the damp tang of sea salt. He inspected cell doors, counted knots in ropes used for daily chores, and found scratch marks on a hidden beam where someone had filed at a lock. That scratch changed the texture of his suspicion into a tangible lead. He removed splinters from the notch and pocketed them for later testing. Brother Felon watched him, then told a small story about Brother Julian's temper, offering lines of dialogue that made the monastery sound like a place with old quarrels rather than a single crime. The first meanie, Cliffanger, arrived when Elias opened a hidden niche in the East Gallery and found a folded ledger page stuck behind a loose tile. He drew the page free and saw a single line in a clerk's hand, payment to a K for silence concerning brother Julian, and then the ink ran where salt had soaked in. Elias' breath slowed. He felt a rush of cold he would later call fear, though. At the moment, it was a practical tightening in his chest. He showed the page to Brother Phelan and then to Sister Miriam. Their faces changed. An initial. Sister Miriam whispered, "We have no at K." Here that discovery changed everything. It implied a payer outside the obvious circle and gave Elias a new direction. Elias took that ledger page down to the quay where a small cluster of fishermen had gathered. He short, precise questions and let the men answer in the quick, curt language of those who trade in facts. One fisherman, Tom Ridley, named a petty official who had business with the monastery once and who used the initials at K. In ledgers around the port, Elias filed the name away and then moved to question the monastery novices. Inside the refectory he confronted 3 novices at the meal table. The novices were pale, faces raw with the fatigue of their watches. Elias directly, who last saw brother Julian alive. The novices answered in turns, their speech clipped. "I did not, brother," said one. "I saw him the morning he left, carrying a package," said another. "He, the abbot, had sent him to collect a debt," the third offered. Elias traded questions with them in rapid-fire lines, and they answered with names, times, and inconsistencies. The back and forth became a pattern of accusation and defense that revealed small truths. Julian had argued with Ansel. Julian had been seen near the ledger. Julian had left on his own the morning he disappeared. Elias pushed further. His sister Miriam if there had been any new arrivals or secret meetings. Miriam hesitated and then told him about a furtive figure near the tidal steps 3 nights ago, someone who wore a cloak that smelled faintly of fish oil and tobacco. He spoke briefly with brother Julian, she said. "I thought it was a trader. I did not tell Ansel because of the hours." Elias let the words settle and then asked, "Describe the man's voice." Miriam copied the tone. "Rough, clipped with the rhythm of a seaman, a man with sea salt in his speech," she said. Elias' thought moved to the quay, to men who held grudges, to the idea that brother Julian carried secrets that outstretched the monastery walls. He returned to the belfry at Prague, dawn during a low storm. Rain started as small threads and then grew thicker. Elias climbed the stair again with brother Phelan and found wet footprints lead to the hatch, and then to a battered door where the iron had been freshly hammered. He peered through a narrow slit and saw darkness and an outline moving as if a person crouched behind the bell's shadow. He called softly, "Show yourself." The outline fled into a narrow passage. A sound of fabric against stone, then silence. Elias pushed through and the chase began. The final confrontation came in the belfry proper. The storm hammered the tower and wind whipped lantern flames into nervous dances. Elias forced the belfry door under a crash of rain and found the saboteur at the mechanism, a man with hands quick and raw from rope. The man turned. His face was not one Elias expected. It was brother Julian's face, older and thinner, hair rumpled with salt and grief. The man moved with a desperate, practiced anger and swung a weight toward Elias. Brother Phelan lunged and the struggle became immediate. A flurry of physical choices. "Elias, hold him." Phelan barked. Elias reacted with controlled force, deflecting a strike and catching a wrist. Julian cursed, voice low and ragged, and struck again. They grappled beneath the bell's swing. A heavy iron clapper whispered through the air, and rain slashed the stones. In 3 quick exchanges Julian shoved Elias back, seized for the hatch, and tried to flee. Elias blocked him and forced a hand to the bell rope stump. The rope gave under fingers that had not been used for years. The bell's throat reverberated and the metal sang a monstrous, single note that knocked breath out of the men. During the scuffle, brother Phelan managed to bind Julian's wrists with a spare belt. Julian's chest heaved. "You do not know what I had to do," he spat, and then a soft, ragged voice broke through the argument. "You took promises, brother Julian. You took promises and you lied." The voice was Abbot Ansel's, and his words fell like a verdict. Elias stepped back and watched the man who had been missing stand caught and plainly human. Once restrained, Julian's story poured out in short, angry fragments. "They promised money to keep quiet," he said. "K paid. I took it for food for my mother. It was only to seal a record. Then Ansel spoke for them. I protested. I thought to leave. They would not let me. Sister Miriam, you were afraid of being chased. They must not find you, the ledger page, the seal found on the tidal steps, and Julian's confession shifted Elias' emotion again, from fear to a brittle clarity. The facts had snapped into a new shape. Julian had been part of a quiet arrangement that involved outside payment, and someone within the monastery had a role in hiding that arrangement. Elias spoke to Julian with a firm cadence. Who is a K? Julian looked at the floor and then at Elias, a man they called a collector. He said, "He is not a man of the abbey. He is a man of the port. He came with coins and promises and left with silence." Brother Felon added details from a watchman who had seen a small boat off the rocks on the nights in question. The confession and the new points of verification bent the town's anger into a new focus. It was not the bell alone, but the secrecy around Brother Julian's disappearance that had inflamed suspicion into potential violence. At dawn the tower stilled. The saboteur, Brother Julian, sat bound on the cold stones while rain slowed to a fine spray. Villagers filled the yard again, faces raw with the wear of a sleepless night. Mayor Thomas demanded immediate punishment. Abbot Ansel stood, chest tightened, and asked for temperance. "We will not lynch him here, Elias." He looked at the abbot, at Brother Felon, and at the crowd. "This ends in a fair hearing, not in a mob. We'll bring Julian before the magistrate. We will trace a case payments. The town will have answers without blood spilled on the quay." His voice was a practical instrument. It moved people from fury to organized motion. Sister Miriam handed Elias the frayed scrap taken from the gallery. He placed it beside the ledger page and the monastery seal on a board near the quay tavern table. The items were concrete proof of a network of actions. A paid silence, an internal wound, and now a man caught in flight with a tool and a chain. Elias's last glance was not a meditation but a decision. He tied the brass chain to his satchel strap and said aloud, "At first light I will question every man who trades with this port. A K will not hide in the market's shadows forever." Brother Felon lifted his lantern higher. Abbot Ansel closed his hand over his robe and spoke in a voice that shook but kept its control. "Do what must be done, Elias. Find truth, not rumor." They escorted Julian down from the tower into the hands of the magistrate's men who had arrived by the quay at Elias' request. The town watched as the knot of events tightened, the cut rope, the iron tool, the ledger page, the dropped seal, and the bound man. Elias made notes in his small leather book with a stub of pencil, each line a measured act to ward off rumor. He did not speak of fate or of destiny. He only catalogued what would follow. Witness statements, names of traders, the ledger's smudged entries, and the need to find a K. Before they left the quay, Elias turned to Sister Miriam. "You did well to tell me," he said. She nodded, and her fingers found his sleeve for a moment, a brief, human contact that meant trust. "I could not keep quiet," she said. "He is not the only one who suffered." Elias kept his reply small. "We will do this right," he said. Dawn broadened into grey and the bell tower rose above it with a new silence. The crowd dispersed in ordered groups, some to the tavern, some to their boats, some to the market, with questions that would become the day's talk. Elias walked the quay with Brother Felon and Mayor Thomas at his side. They discussed practical next steps in the terse language of men who must act. The tide came in and licked the quay. Each wave left a narrow line of foam that erased the smaller footprints. Elias watched those imprints fade and felt a steadier resolve settle in him. He had closed the chapter's immediate danger. The bell would not ring again that morning, and a man who had set the mechanism was in custody. The final lines of the chapter are concrete and immediate. Elias set the monastery seal on the magistrate's table and locked eyes with Mayor Thomas. "I will pursue a K," he said. "Search the docks, question the merchants, and hold the people fast from the tide of anger." Thomas agreed with a short, hard nod. A courier took the ledger page and set off to find the port official named in the accounts. Elias gathered his lantern and map, put the brass chain in his pocket, and walked toward the narrow lane that led to the market. where the dais first stalls were rising and where new questions would wait for the man who had followed the bell's call. The chapter closes on that movement, the detective stepping from the quay into the town with tools and proofs and a list of names. The bell's single toll still vibrated in the memory of stone and timber, but now Alias carried the first proofs of what had caused it. He had found the man who had forced the bell to speak, uncovered a payment that had hidden a crime, and set the town toward a legal path. The next actions were practical. Interviews, ledger tracing, and a sea of small, stubborn questions. He walked with those tasks in mind, and with a clear choice made, he would follow the money and the men who handled it until A.K. could no longer hide behind the harvest noise. A cloaked figure stumbled past Elias Moreau as the monastery bell began to toll, though no hand hung on its rope. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He stepped forward, lantern held low, and the figure melted into the damp alleys. Footsteps slapped wet stone. A villager shouted, and the bell swung once more without anyone at its cord. Elias moved with the habit of a man who reads small signs. He had been pulled here from his skiff at the quay by those first distant strikes. The boat's keel still scraped the wood in his memory, and salt clung to his coat. He kept his hand over his pocket watch chain and drew in the smell of iron. The first 5 breaths he took were all practice in focus. He could not afford to call the sound supernatural. Suspicion had to turn to facts. He pushed toward the green. Lantern light showed faces drawn and wet. Marta the fisherwoman stood at the edge of the crowd, shawl pulled, fingers worrying a net. "Elias!" she called that bell. "There's no one at the rope." Her voice cut into the press of voices and stuck like a hook. "Show me the way, Elias." He did not wait for greetings. He had learned that questions asked too slowly let panic invent answers. He threaded between men whose boots left muddy prints, and a child ran ahead, pointing. The tower loomed in the fog like a wound in the sky. Constable Thomas Grieve met him at the gate. Grieve's face was flushed from running and anger, you saw it. Grieve demanded, you heard it too. His hand rested on the pommel of his short cudgel. I heard it, Elias. I smelled metal near the quay earlier. Show me the prints. He glanced down and followed a faint line of footprints that led from the square toward the monastery, pressed shallow into the algae, slick stones. Grieve barked at a pair of boys to keep the crowd back. Elias, we don't have men enough. If the tower is touched, if confession is forced back, there'll be trouble. He spoke in short, blunt sentences. Elias noted the steadiness behind Grieve's worry. The constable would not let the square boil into violence if he could stop it. Marta stepped forward, voice tight. Abbot Marcellus says the rope was cut years ago. He us himself when the storm took 3 brothers. There is nothing to pull now. She jabbed a finger at the monastery gate, so who rang it? Her breath came in small, rapid pulls. Elias. Whoever rang it left prints. Whoever rang it left scent. Whoever rang it might have stuck the rope back to trick the village. He did not say the word. Hoax outright. He let the idea land as a possibility instead. Suspicion shifted toward tangible evidence. He moved to inspect the gate's ironwork. The monastery gate held a fresh scratch near the hinge. Elias ran a gloved thumb along the metal and found a tiny smear of soot. He tucked his magnifying lens from the vest and bent close. Soot and salt, he murmured. Someone climbed or dragged something wet and ash, dark. He straightened and met Grieve's eyes. Follow the prints. Keep them from the stairwell. I will speak with the abbot. He stepped up the stone path, lantern held high. Outside the gate, a woman pushed forward and shouted, "Is there a man hiding inside?" A traitor, her voice spread and others took it up. Staccato accusations struck the cold. The crowd's fear sharpened into demand. Elias felt his next emotional turn, agitation. The villagers wanted someone to blame, and agitation could flatten the slow work of inquiry. Abbot Marcellus Holt received Elias on the monastery steps with a calm that had corners. He was narrower and paler than the portraits that lined the refectory. His robe bore a damp ring at the hem. Elias Moreau, he said, you come with a lawman's caution. We will not hinder you. His words arrived measured, but his hands twisted the rosary at his waist. You will let me inspect the tower. Elias. He kept his voice even. The abbot's eyes flicked to the crowd. Then back to Elias under supervision. Abbot Marcellus answered, "Brother Jonah and Novice Luke will accompany you. We will not let disorder enter the cloister." He paused. "We keep our vows, Mr. Moro. Give us a chance to uphold them." The plea sounded like a request and like a warning. Elias followed Brother Jonah up the spiral stair. Jonah moved with a limp that came from a healed leg wound. His hands were calloused but gentle. Novice Luke trailed behind, young and silent, his head shaving still visible beneath his hood. Each step sent a damp, mineral smell through the narrow shaft. The rope ladder that led to the bell chamber hung broken and coiled below. Its end showed a clean sever where rope fiber had been cut long ago. They reached the lower chamber and found the main bell rope looped around a new cleat. Elias crouched and touched the loop. Fresh fibers had been threaded to appear old. He lifted the scrap of cloth caught on the cleat. It was coarse, ash-stiffened, and torn along a straight seam. He held it to the lantern and saw a faint handprint in suit near the fray. "This is recent. Elias, not a ghost." He held the scrap out. Brother Jonah's fingers trembled as he took it. "Jonah Elias, whose habit is coarse like this?" The question landed in the stone-walled room. Jonah swallowed. "We have a lay brother who tends the kitchen fire. His tunic." He stopped, jaw working. The novice shifted uneasily. "I will speak plainly. Brother Mathis has tended the hearth for 20 years. His sleeves are rough. He has soot on his palms from work." Jonah's voice broke on the last word. Elias noted the fissure forming between practical detail and inference. He could not arrest on quiet suggestion. He put down the scrap and examined the bell yoke. A smear of ash tracked along a shoulder of iron. The bell rope's loop had been tied with a knot that would not hold under repeated use. It looked made to deceive, to create a single toll. The bell rang again. Not a ghostly peal, but a single, heavy strike that vibrated the mortar. The sound arrived while Elias had his hand on the iron. He felt the tower tremor up through his boots. Below, someone shouted. The villagers' voices rose into a demand. Elias felt fear shift in him, not panic, but the sudden tight clarity that comes when a plan must be made now. He called down, "Close the gate, constable. Keep the crowd from the stair." Greaves' reply came up breathless. They were not listening. He cursed and the reply cut off as several men surged. Elias moved to the narrow door that led to the summit. He put his shoulder against it and felt wood give slightly under pressure. A shape brushed the frame on the other side. Elias shoved the door wide. A cloaked figure leaped through, thrusting to flee, and the bell swung wildly from a single violent swing. Elias grabbed at the figure. The cloak flapped with storm, sodden weight. Brother Jonah lunged to help and struck the intruder's arm. The figure twisted and kicked. The bell's momentum thudded through the floorboards and sent a rain of dust from the rafters. Elias's left shoulder caught the intruder's weight and his right hand sought the tangled cloth at the figure's collar. They wrestled in the high, narrow space. A lantern banged against the stone and guttered. Lucas' whispered prayer clipped the edge of sound. Lightning flashed through the round windows and lit the scene in brief, white clarity. A pale, gloved hand, a face half, hidden, a thin scar along a brow that matched the scar Elias knew on his own features. The figure's foot found the narrow ladder, and for a breath Elias thought he had them pinned. Then the intruder shoved and slipped down the service stair. A scrap of fabric tore free and fluttered from a nail. Elias lunged, but the figure vanished into a black slit beneath the eaves. Brother Jonah grabbed at air. Elias crashed shoulder first into the stone and tasted iron. He rose with the torn scrap of habit clenched in his fist and a strip of ash on his palm. Brother Jonah pointed to smears along the landing. There's a trail, Jonah panted. The ash led to a trapdoor, not the public stair. The trapdoor had been eased open from beneath. Elias realized the sabotage ran deeper than an afternoon hoax. In the courtyard below, someone struck a drum of sorts and voices swelled into shouts for covenant and confession. Marta's face appeared at the gate, drawn and bright with accusation. "But," she called, "open the cloister. If there is sin, let it be named." Her words were sharp enough to split the night. Abbot Marcellus climbed to the landing and set both palms on the balustrade. He peered down at the crowd. "We will not expose our brethren to violence," he said. "Do you ask us to tear open rooms and accuse men without proof?" He used the word men like a shield. Elias came down the stair to stand beside him. Abbot Marcellus, there is evidence. There is a torn habit and suit on the bell yoke. I will not accuse a man until I have named him. But I cannot let the crowd decide by fear." He looked at the abbot and then at Brother Jonna. "Jonna, we need the kitchen roster. Luke, stay where you are. Grieve, keep the gate closed. Marta, tell your neighbors to keep the peace." He issued each order like placing a tool on a table. Grieve exchanged quick lines with two burly fishermen. "Keep them back." He snapped, "Keep them back, I say!" The back and forth rose and fell with the motion of hands. Elias felt the crowd's pressure like a physical thing. He needed to steer it. He examined the torn scrap again under a steadier lantern light. The weave-matched lay garments, not a brother's outer robe. The ash pattern at its hem matched soot from a hearth burned with driftwood and coal. Elias rubbed at the fibers and smelled a sore tang of sea, tang and pipe tobacco. Marta stepping close, yes. Elias did not turn. Someone working near the kitchen who smokes takes their cloak into a place of embers and leaves a faint aroma. That aroma matches a footprint I found by the quay earlier. If the same hand visited the bell, their prints should line up. He pointed to the sequence of steps that led from quay to gate to stair. Abbot Marcellus looked older in the lantern light. Brother Mathis leaves the kitchen late hours to keep embers down. He smokes after work to steady his hands. He is not a man of cunning. His voice tightened around the words. Elias watched the abbot's fingers twist the rosary. He saw the abbot's face soften when he said Mathis' name. He felt an emotion shift in the abbot, from guarded politeness to protective pleading, and recognized the same shift in himself, from suspicion to a reluctant caution. He did not want an old man blamed without proof. They moved to the refectory and called Brother Mathis. When the lay brother trudged in, his sleeves were clean, but his hands bore a thin ring of ash at the nails. He kept his eyes down. "Mathis, Elias, where were you at the bell's last toll?" Mathis' voice came small. "I slept in the kitchen. I had my pipe. Yes, I fed the hearth at dusk. I did not climb the tower, sir." He spoke in short, precise sentences. He looked toward the abbot, and there was something like shame in the way his jaw worked. "Do your hands smell of tobacco, Elias?" Mathis turned his wrist and sniffed. "They do." "I have no secret," he the last words against his teeth. Elias studied him and then asked, "May I see your jacket?" Mathis shrugged and pulled it off. A small tear showed at the cuff, and along the seam a darker line of soot. Elias held the torn scrap beside the cuff. The fibers matched, the ash pattern aligned. He did not pronounce guilt. He put the scrap down on the table. The refectory filled with murmurs. Grieve's jaw clenched. Marta's hand covered her mouth. Abbot Marcellus' shoulders sank as if bearing a heavy sack. The emotional tide shifted again. Accusation rose from the crowd like steam. Elias felt the pull to close the case quickly. His next choice would tell whether justice here would be careful or cruel. "Mathis, did you see anyone leave the tower? Anyone at the stair when you passed?" The question was aimed to force a choice. Mathis shook his head. "No. I keep to the kitchen. I heard the bell. I found the rope tied as though someone had meant to make it ring once. I saw no one. I swear on the work I have done here." He spoke the oath as one might read a ledger. Abbot Marcellus cleared his throat. "We will not throw a brother to the crowd. If the evidence points to Brother Mathis, we will hold a canonical inquiry. But I need time to protect the men in the cloister from violence." "Elias, will you stay until dawn?" The question with a softness Elias had heard before, when a man asks a favor because there is no other way. Elias considered the list of demands he had given and the facts that still hung loose. He could leave to follow the prints along the coast, follow the salty track to some hidden place where a saboteur might hide. Or he could stay and take the slow inside path through confessions, rosters, and quiet rooms. The agitation in his belly steadied into resolve. He answered, "I will remain, but I will not let the cloister stone hide evidence. I will examine the trap door and the service stair. I will chart every footstep between quay and bell. He spoke as a man who planned. Abbot Marcellus nodded and opened his hands. Then we will trust your method. Mid. Moreau, for the safety of all who live here, allow Brother Jonah to assist you. He knows the cloister's private ways. Jonah's eyes met Elias' and in them Elias saw patience and a new resolve. Night pressed on. They descended to the service passages. The trapdoor's hinge yielded to Elias's oil lamp. A narrow stair sloped down into a place that smelled of old damp and packed salt. The ash on the landing matched the ash in the scrap. Someone had used the service stair to move from kitchen to bell without passing the public stair. Elias noted the deliberate care in that choice. They followed the dark corridor and found marks on the wall where a hand had clutched and slid. A fingernail gouge bore a smear of soot. Novice Luke, who had trailed earlier, said nothing, but his face registered the small shock that comes when a secret rote is revealed. Elias touched the gouge. His fingers came away with a dark smear. As they rose back into the lower chamber, Elias paused. He had a plan to question Brother Mathis in private, to check the kitchen for signs of furtive passage, and to measure the bell rope knot to see who had the strength and skill to tie it that way. But before he could set that plan in motion, the bell rang out a single slow toll, not high but hollow and set low in the breast of the tower. The sound felt like an order. Someone below screamed. The cry sharpened into a name. Mathis! It came in slices through the stairwell. Elias felt his attention narrow like a lens. He did not let the crowd's voice make his choice. He went instead to where the sound had come from. Brother Jonah led and pushed open the kitchen door. The kitchen was empty. Pots hung silent. The hearth coals were cold. On the worktable a ladle lay spilled, and beside it a scrap of cloth damp with seawater and ash. Elias picked it up and found a single, dark hair threaded through the weave. It was not Mathis' coarse brown. It was finer and the color near black, someone left in a hurry, Elias. At that moment the refectory door banged hard. A man outside shouted, "Abbot." The sea. Carrier reports a skiff beached with wet footprints leading toward the west gate. The voice was breathless and edged with alarm. The new event tore through the room like a gust. Elias' mind moved along tracks. The footprints at the quay, the wet scrap, the stolen route through the service stair, the soot smears, all pointed to someone nimble who knew the cloister's hidden ways, or someone who had learned them quickly. He felt the final shift in feeling for the night, from suspicion to urgent clarity. There was a plan afoot beyond one man. The bell's ringing was a signal. He rose and grabbed his lantern. "Show me the way to the west gate," he said. "Grieve, take 4 men and secure the beach. Abbot, keep the cloister closed. Jonah, stay with me." The commands fell like pegs into place. As they ran toward the gate, Marta caught Elias' sleeve. "Elias, what if it's the sea? What if they came by water to punish the monastery?" She the words quickly, and then her face set. Elias met her gaze and nodded. "Then we will meet them at the shore," he said. They reached the quay where the skiff lay half in mud. Footprints led away in quick, muddled lines toward the west gate and then toward the cliffs. A scrap of wet cloth clung to a splinter of wood. The line of prints widened into 2 sets, then narrowed again. Elias crouched and pressed lantern light into the tread. A faint crescent of soot hugged one print's heel. He held the scrap to the light and found a thread of finer hair caught in its weave. He thought of the hair he had found in the kitchen cloth and matched it in his mind. Someone had moved between kitchen and shore. Someone had access inside the monastery and to a skiff outside. A cold wind pressed across the quay. Elias made a decision that would bend the coming hours. He would follow the prints along the cliff path alone for a while, to see where they led, and then return to the cloister before dawn to question those left behind. His choice aloud, and it turned into a promise. "I will follow the tracks. If more men are involved, I will find proof. If Brother Mathis is innocent, I will prove it." He left the rest unsaid. Abbot Marcellus pressed a small brass key into Elias' palm as if handing over more than metal. "Take this for the crypt door, the abbot. Do not go down without Jonah." The old passages confused the unprepared. The abbot's voice lowered until it was nearly a whisper. He would not ask for trust, but he was asking nonetheless. Elias tucked the key inside his coat and started along the cliff path, lantern bobbing. Behind him, voices rose and fell like waves. Ahead, the footprints led toward a cove vanished by tide and shadow. The last thing Elias saw before the fog swallowed the track was Brother Jonah pausing on the quay, his shoulders squared, rosary in hand. Brother Jonah closed the solar door behind him, the ash, dark cloth clenched in his hand. A single toll cut through the rain as Elias Moro landed on the wet quay and sprinted toward the monastery gate. Suspicion tightened around his chest when he saw the villagers clustered under the tower, faces turned upward like supplicants, while Father Cuthbert and Brother Ambrose stood beneath the coil of rope and argued in low, urgent tones. "The rope is cut," someone shouted. The claim landed in Elias's ears with the weight of a probable crime. He pushed through the crowd, water sluicing from his coat, and reached Marianne Lark just inside the yard. "Marianne," Elias, dragging his hand along the brass of his pocket watch before he pocketed it, who first heard it. His voice was steady. His hands showed another truth when they tightened on the lantern handle. Suspicion, clear and usable, guided his questions. He had arrived because the bell had sounded despite no one at the wheel. After the skiff's scrape against the quay the night before, the same mystery had pushed him back to this place. He had come to test whether the sound was omen or mechanism. Marianne's breath steamed in the lamplight. It rang 3 times at once. She said like a warning, "Missa." "Moro, I was at Brother Ambrose's door. I heard a voice beneath it, not wind." Her voice stopped, small and raw. Elias watched her jaw. She kept looking at the tower rather than at him. That avoidance anchored the scene in fact. She had heard something human under the bell. Father Cuthbert pushed forward, robes dragged with river mud. "This is sacrilege," he said, and then he looked at Elias with a refusal turned into a challenge. "You are not one of us, Moro. We will decide what answers the house gives." Elias's shoulders tightened. He answered with a single, even line, "Then permit me to examine the tower, Abbot." The villagers deserve truth, not silence. He did not demand permission in rhetoric. He set his hand on the stone beside the coil and felt damp salt in the mortar. They argued sharply for 3 breaths, and then Brother Ambrose stepped between. "Let him up, Ambrose. There is soot above where nothing should burn." "Let him see." Elias nodded. Ambrose moved with a stiff, deliberate pace. The brothers' palms rubbed together as if to brace against slick steps. There was urgency in Ambrose's gait that read like confession. The brother had something to show, and did not trust it would remain hidden. Elias followed Ambrose by the narrow spiral stair. Wind pushed rain into the open shutter. The stair smelled of salt, boiled cabbage, and old oil. Elias kept his hand on the stone wall to steady himself. He counted the steps by ear more than by sight. At the bell chamber landing, Ambrose struck a match. The light revealed a frayed rope end wrapped around a shard of jagged timber higher in the shaft, and a smear of fresh soot that could not belong to centuries of smoke. Elias crouched to touch the soot. It blackened his gloved fingertip and left a smear. He stood and looked up. "There is a splice here, Ambrose, a hidden spindle. We have used only the one rope for years." "How?" Ambrose's sentence cut off as both men examined the shaft. Elias felt a shift move through him. Suspicion became focused inquiry. He smelled tar, wet hemp, and something iron-like that suggested nails or a recent puncture. He ordered action with his eyes. "Show me the inner shaft, Elias." They pried at the stonework. Elias' fingers found a seam, and then a hidden door that yielded after a hard lever. Inside the inner shaft a second spindle turned on iron bearings. A rope coiled low where no rope should run. The rope looked newer where it had been tied to an unseen device. Tension rose in Elias if a physical thing tightened at the back of his neck. He did not name the feeling. He moved to test it. He laid his palm flat on the hidden spindle, felt the give of friction, and listened for the click of gearing. Back in the cloister, Elias pressed Father Cuthbert about payments and visitors who kept watch at night, who came and left the stores. Elias, he was brisk, asking single, clear questions so answers could not hide behind piety. Father Cuthbert's face closed like a door. He answered with 2 statements and then a denial. The monastery pays small sums to keep quiet certain claims against our house. We are poor stewards, Moro, but we have kept our duty. Elias's instincts narrowed, doubt unspooled from suspicion. He needed a record. Elias forced entry into the abbot's private records room by moving a spare ledger that fell away from its shelf to expose a simple latch. He did not pretend surprise when the latch gave. Candlelight threw hard angles across ledgers. Elias read entries aloud as if testing their truth. December 15th. Payment to coastal labourer £6. January 2nd. Payment, Gabriel Hale, £10. Elias's voice did not rise. He let the name rest in the air. Father Cuthbert's hands curled on the edge of the table. Father Cuthbert stepped toward the ledger. We paid to secure grain, Mr. Moro. We did what we thought right to feed the brothers in winter. His sentences grew shorter, then clipped. Gabriel Hale was a steward. He saved our storehouse once. We were grateful, that is all. His eyes avoided Elias. Elias heard another emotion shift. Doubt moved into a quiet anger. The detective's jaw tightened. He slid his hand into the ledger and found a folded scrap of cloth stained with sea salt. Marianne waited outside the records door. Elias took a breath and opened the doorway. She looked at him with a small, hard courage. I told you there was a voice beneath the bell, she said. It called a name, it Hale. She folded her hands until the knuckles whited. Her presence moved the investigation into a personal register. She had known Gabriel from the coast, and her recognition made an accusation. Elias listened and let that recognition press on the facts. Elias and Brother Ambrose followed the ledger's trail to the tidal storeroom beneath the cliffs, where the sea filled the lower shelves during high tide. The sky had not cleared. The storm had become a low, steady battering. The storeroom door listed on its hinges, and inside there was the smell of rope and brine, the tang of kerosene, and a clump of sand that had been recently disturbed. Elias crouched to examine the sand. Footprints disappeared toward a collapsed crate, and then cut back in a sweep toward the cliff path. He called the pattern aloud. Someone came here to set something, then left in a hurry. Ambrose answered with a clipped, or was interrupted. The exchange tightened into a plan. A movement at the door made them drop to their knees. A figure in a dark cloak fumbled with a coil of rope near a wooden post. Elias lunged. The man backed, then sought a knife in his belt. Ambrose's hand closed on his sleeve. Stop. Elias barked. The man lurched and his hood fell. Gabriel Hale's face looked smaller than rumor had painted it, lines like dried seaweed, eyes burned by sun and bitterness. Gabriel Hale. Elias. You are wanted for setting a device in the bell shaft. Gabriel spat sea water from his mouth. Wanted by whom? He asked. Gabriel's voice was raw. Wanted by the abbot and his coin, more like. They gave me work, and then payment. They mean to ensure the bell would ring when needed to hide shipments. They mean no one would ask how. He gripped the rope until his knuckles whitened, and then he let it go, as if it had burned him. I did not want harm. I wanted coin and a place to sleep. But when the smugglers cheated me, I struck back. I made the bell call to cover my own revenge. Gabriel's words were short, jagged statements. Elias watched how his shoulders shook and how his mouth set. He heard an internal change. Confession flickered into accusation. Elias turned to Ambrose. Tie him, Elias. He crouched to search Gabriel and found a scrap of a steward's uniform caught on a nail, mud still in its seam. The scrap matched the ledger's notation. The evidence was specific and tactile. Elias secured Gabriel with a length of spare rope. Gabriel's hands bled where the knot pressed. He did not flinch. Do not let him go, Marianne. Let the villagers see what they sheltered. Her voice had no triumph, only a raw need for truth. They brought Gabriel back to the cloister. People pressed around the yard, lanterns pitifully small against rain. Father Cuthbert stood between the accused and the crowd. You will answer to law and to God, Cuthbert. Then he turned inward and, in a voice that trembled, he admitted something Elias had suspected from the ledger's entries. We paid to keep our debts settled. We paid Gabriel for work. When the storms came, we could not always feed all. I arranged payments to keep quiet those who owned us compromise. It was a sin of calculation, not of malice. He spoke quickly, as if the confession would relieve him. Elias watched the villagers' faces. Some trembled with anger, others with betrayal. Marianne stepped forward and named specifics. He took our flour and then sold passage. He lied to our faces. He sent the bell to call the smugglers while families went hungry. Her short statements struck like small hammers. The villagers' murmurs rose and fell into sharp exclamations. Father Cuthbert's shoulders bowed as if under weight. A council began in the yard, sharp and immediate. Villagers demanded answers. Ambrose argued for mercy. He saved the stores once. Ambrose, he kept us from famine. We cannot throw him out without hearing more. Voices rose. Elias kept quiet. He watched reactions. The crowd's anger, Marianne's steady insistence, Ambrose's protective strain, Cuthbert's shame. Each person moved the verdict. Elias listened to the rhythm of accusation and defense. Two lines of thought collided until one snapped with a weighty clarity. Gabriel spoke up, and his words changed the shape of accusation. "I did set the bell," he said, "but it was never meant to take a life. I only meant to warn the smugglers of patrols. When they cheated me, I took their stores and I blamed the monastery for sheltering them. I wanted payment returned," he breathed quickly. "They used the bell to hide cargo. I thought to end their theft by making the bell sound when I needed men to retrieve my goods. Then things went wrong at the cliff last month. Men fought, a cart tipped. I swear I did not mean for anyone to be hurt." The admission turned two types of blame: criminal intent and human desperation. Marianne's eyes filled. She said nothing. Elias felt the emotion shift again. Anger lifted at the confession into an unsettled pity. Elias considered the facts and the faces. He had to choose how to present them. He walked to the ledger and set it open to the entries naming Gabriel. "This ledger shows payments and instructions," he said. "This ledger ties Gabriel to the abbot's arrangements. But it also shows a pattern of dependence. Someone ordered this to be allowed." He looked at Father Cuthbert. Cuthbert's answer was quiet. "We bargained with men because we had no other means to keep our doors open." He met Elias' eyes and did not attempt to excuse himself further. A sudden shout came from the yard's edge. A villager held up a scrap of canvas found under the bell tower stones, a page torn from a steward's ledger that named a coastal house known for illicit trade. The scrap connected the monastery's payments to the smugglers. The discovery shifted the narrative outward. This was not only Gabriel's revenge but an organized effort. Elias felt the stakes rise. He felt the scene narrow to a single decisive action. He turned and said, "We must go to the summit and examine the bell face to face. If there is a mechanism, we will find it." The order resolved the immediate argument into action. They climbed the wet spiral together, lanterns held low. The bell chamber stank of oil and wet hemp. Elias found the hidden spindle and exposed the gearing. There was evidence of recent repair. Fresh file marks, a hammered nail bent to a new angle, and the rope splice that led to a trap door in the corridor above the storeroom. Elias traced the path with his gloved finger. He felt the logic of the contrivance beneath the monk's piety. The bell had been made to ring by men below, not by winds above. The discovery was the chapter's mini cliffhanger. It proved deliberate manipulation. They moved to confront the last link. Ayers led a small party to the cliffside storeroom where moonlight struck the wet stones in thin silver. The storm had softened. The wind still pushed salty spray. In the storeroom they found crates opened, and a cache that had not been logged in monastery books. A man crouched among the boxes and tried to reach a box lid when Ambrose's lantern turned on his face. He was a lean smuggler with a scar through his eyebrow. "Stop!" Elias ordered. The man drew a short knife. Brother Ambrose lunged and caught his wrist with a clean grip. "You will not harm the chapel's guests, Ambrose." The smuggler's breath came fast. "We were paid to move goods to the cathedral by Gabriel, by the man on the cliff. There was a promise of coins. We did as told." He looked at Elias and then at Cuthbert and then at Gabriel. Gabriel winced. "They used me first," he said. They needed the bell to lift goods across the cliff to the smuggler's boat. Then they cut me out of the share. I made the bell sound to force a pickup. I did not expect violence." The smuggler broke into a laugh that sounded like a cough. "You think you are the only one with hands dirtied. The abbot made deals. The smugglers made deals. I made a choice to take back what I thought owed me. Elias had to decide whether to arrest for theft, to press full charges for collusion, or to recommend mercy for men driven by hunger. The villagers demanded justice. Marianne for restitution. Father Cuthbert offered to open the monastery stores to the village and to give voice to the ledgerer's truth. Ambrose petitioned for leniency toward those who had sheltered the community. Elias weighed law and consequence. He set Gabriel before the crowd and said, "You will answer for the devices and for the deceit. I will take your confession to the magistrate, and I will ensure the ledger is published to the parish. But I will also demand the abbot make restitution. The men who acted under hunger will be bound to repay with labor where possible. That is the balance of law and mercy I can stand by." He did not phrase mercy as sentiment. He named actions. Gabriel lowered his head. He muttered, "I will accept whatever you say." Father Cuthbert stepped forward and, in a hushed voice, agreed to Elias's terms. Marianne watched him close as if measuring every syllable. The crowd thinned slowly, not with forgiveness, but with the cold arithmetic of consequence. Ambrose stayed close to Gabriel, and at one point he touched Gabriel's shoulder with a short, steady pressure that looked like an offer to accompany him to the magistrate. At dawn Elias climbed the bell tower alone. The light slid pale over the wet stones. The bell hung silent, coil undone beside tidal, washed footprints on the summit's ledge. Elias opened his notebook and wrote the account with precise words. Mechanism found, ledger entries noted, confession taken, abbot's admission, restitution offered. He set down the facts and then folded the ledger into a satchel for the magistrate's office. The concrete actions closed the night's chaos into paper that could face men in court. A gull called from the sea. Elias pocketed his watch and looked over the cliff toward the village. Marianne stood in the yard near Ambrose and Father Cuthbert. Gabriel was led away with 2 villagers flanking him. The bell was quiet. Elias felt an aftertaste of unease, not a poetic sorrow, but the knowledge that arrangements and debts would reshape lives here. He did not promise absolution. He had not pardoned, but had chosen a path where restitution, confession, and law met without spectacle. He closed the final page and walked down the tower steps. As he reached the courtyard gate, Marianne stepped up beside him and handed him a scrap of wet canvas, one of the torn ledger pages she had found. "Keep this, Elias," she said, "so no one can say we never saw the truth." Elias took the scrap and folded it into his pocket. He looked at the monastery one last time, stained stone, rope coiled, the little pool of water in the courtyard that mirrored the tower's face. The chapter's tensions had been resolved into accountable acts and difficult remediations. The bell would not toll without hands now, and the village would watch who walked within the cloister. He did not linger for speeches. He mounted his skiff with the ledger, the scrap, and a few salted rolls Marianne insisted on providing. The tide pulled him away. The monastery receded into grey, its outlines clean against the pale sky. The final sight that stayed with him was the coiled rope lying beside tidal, washed footprints at the summit. A concrete image of how close the community had come to being pulled under by necessity and secrecy. Elias rode toward report and reckoning, and the ledger's weight in his bag felt like the quiet weight of duty fulfilled. The bell stayed silent as the village stirred with dawn and conversations already forming into plans. Elias set his jaw against the chill and steered into the morning's open water, the coast narrowing behind him with the certainty that the truth had been found and that consequences would follow in the days to come. The suspicion instigated every move Elias made, and it remained visible in his gestures, the steady rubbing of his fingertips when he thought, the measured steps up the spiral stair, the even tone of his questions. When others confessed or denied, Elias' reactions were physical. A tightened jaw, a folded ledger, a hand that closed on a rope. Dialogue advanced the plot. Marianne named the voice. Ambrose vouched for entry. Father Cuthbert admitted payments. Gabriel confessed under pressure. Each exchange produced actions that altered the case, and each discovery, the hidden spindle, the ledger entry, the scrap of canvas, advanced the resolution. The night ended with a concrete decision. Ledger in hand, Gabriel bound for judgment, and the abbot offering restitution. The final beat is the bell silent on its summit, the coiled rope on stone, and Elias rowing away with proof in his satchel.